So this is lines 198 to 209 in the first book of Virgil's Aeneid, and this section in particular is Aeneas' speech to his fellow Trojans. While this is the second time we've heard Aeneas speak so far, the first one was more of an internal soliloquy, while this one is very pointedly a speech to his comrades. First, for a bit of context, in the last lines, the Trojans have been almost entirely decimated by the storm sent by Aeolus on Juno's request, and they've now been driven to the shores of Libya, where they're trying to recoup and find the rest of their countrymen. So Aeneas' speech now is an attempt to raise their spirits and inspire them to keep on. He begins, "O comrades, for we are not ignorant of misfortunes before," and there's a wos implied here, which makes it, "O you all, having suffered from this PPP here, more heavy," and things is also kind of implied here. "A god will give an end to these also." And now he goes through all the things that the Trojans have been through, partly to stress their misfortunes, but also because these are all things that Virgil hasn't actually mentioned, so Aeneas is sort of paraphrasing for the reader. He says, "You all even," and this et can be taken as both and, but it's more likely that he's just using it as a syncopated form of etiam, which would make that even. So you all have even approached, and that's another syncopation right there, the madness of Scylla and the deeply roaring rocks. And you all even experienced, with estis being implied here to go with that experti. So you experienced the rocks of the Cyclopses. And both these things here are direct parallels to Odysseus' travels in the Odyssey. Scylla is a monster who lives on one side of a narrow strait and eats several of Odysseus' men as they sail by. And the reference to the Cyclops, of course, refers to the well-known encounter between the Greeks and the Cyclops Polyphemus, who is eventually blinded by Odysseus. And that was certainly something Virgil would have been doing intentionally to draw a parallel between the Aeneid and the Odyssey. So to go back to the text, as Aeneas remembers these things, he says, "Recall your spirits and send out your sad fear." And then he says, "Perhaps at some time it will please us," that nos is also implied here, that it will please us to remember even these. And this last line, it should be noted, is one of the most famous verses from the whole Aeneid, very often used and quoted in other places. And then he continues on, "So through different calamities, through so many crises of things, we stretch or we extend into Latium." And that right there could be considered prolepsis, since Aeneas shouldn't actually know at this point where they're going. But that's sort of Virgil taking over there in that line, saying that they're going into Latium. So into Latium, where the fates show peaceful seats. There it is, with that S being implied, it is divine will for the kingdoms of Troy to rise again. And then he calls out to his comrades, "Endure and save yourselves for favorable things." And then finally, his speech is over and Virgil ends this little section. He recalls such words, so dictas implied here, such words with his voice, and weary with huge concerns, he feigns hope in his face, represses pain deep in his heart. And it can be seen quite clearly that Virgil intentionally uses chiasmus in this last line to contrast the hope he has to show off externally for the sake of his men and the actual pain and grief Aeneas is feeling on the inside. So that is it for lines 198 to 209.